Ideal customer, no fear.
Hey everybody, I'm Mike Levy here in a very rainy Pemberton, BC, and Ghost is one of 4 German brands that we have here at this year's fall field test. Now this is their Riot Trail Full Party. It's a 140mm travel trail bike, and they say it's the one you want if you're looking to save energy on the uphill and riot downhill. The first thing we're going to look at is the cable routing. Now Ghost is doing something a little bit different here, and these cables are externally-ish routed. They're hidden underneath a bolt-on plastic down tube protector that covers nearly the entire length of the down tube. The cables then cross each other underneath the bottom bracket shell and are zip tied to the chainstays. Now speaking of zip ties, the bike comes with a sturdy chainstay protector, but it's also zip tied to the chainstay. Lastly, at the back of the bike, there's a post-mount brake setup that lets you run any rotor size you want without having to bolt an adapter onto another adapter. And I hope you like purple, because this is the only color you're gonna get. Onto the geometry, and Ghost is using something that they call Super Fit. Now the whole idea here, according to them, is that the bike will be ready to fit you without any changes. You look at the geometry chart, it tells you what size you need, and you're gonna be good to go. We're gonna talk to Kazimer and Alicia later on to find out how true that actually is. It's time to talk about suspension design, and Ghost is using something called Traction Link. Now what that is a dual short link design. Now those links are co-rotating, and that means that they both rotate in the same direction. Ghost says that the system is designed to prevent squatting under power. Now that means that it should pedal pretty well while also being active under braking. One interesting thing to point out is that Ghost says that the axle path is actually vertical instead of being a slight arc like we see on most other suspension designs. The idea there is that it follows the same path as the front axle when both ends are compressing, thereby preserving the bike's geometry and handling. Speaking of forks and shocks, this is one of the few bikes at the field test that isn't sprung by Fox or Rock shocks. Ghost is using Formula suspension with a mod coil sprung rear shock and a Selva air sprung fork. Now both of those are delivering 140mm of travel, and interestingly, you can also change out the damping circuit if you're looking for a drastically different kind of performance from either. What does that mean on the trail? Let's find out.
All right, so we have a lot to talk about with the Ghost, and as usual, we're gonna start with climbing. The Ghost is the heaviest bike here. Kaz, what does that mean on the trail?
It was the least efficient bike here.
Yep.
And when you're up pedaling, it does feel not very efficient, fairly active, especially if you're standing up out of the saddle. It's got that coil shock, so you can overlook a little bit of bob, but there's more bob than I expected. So kind of every pedal stroke as you're standing up, it's just oscillating through its travel. When you are seated, it's a little bit better. It's a little calmer. It does have a very steep seat-tube angle, and steep seat-tube angles can help basically keep your position over the suspension so it doesn't bob a lot. But overall, active climber, it doesn't feel very efficient.
Alicia, it sounds like between the weight and the active climbing, this bike isn't exactly ideal for someone who faces a lot of vertical to get to their trails.
Agreed. Yeah, it does bob up and down quite a bit, and it's super sluggish feeling. I think a combination of just the amount of energy you're losing in the suspension combined with dragging the dead weight up the hill, it's a lot to pedal.
So Kaz, it sounds like this thing is maybe not the best climber of the bunch, but it's relatively short, and it sounds like the active suspension might help with traction. So thinking about some upsides to the Ghost, when it's technical and wet as it's been here, is it a good technical climber?
It has decent grip, yeah. I mean, the coil shock does provide more traction, so the rear wheel is stuck to the ground, helps you clamber over things, but some of the geometry makes it a little bit awkward climbing regardless of what the suspension is doing. So it has fairly long back end, 450mm chainstays, which it's fine. Like longer chainstays can actually make bikes be better climbers. But then the front end, the reach is 467mm. So it's a little bit kind of a cramped cockpit with a longer back end. It just, all these kind of ingredients mixed together into something that's a little bit odd to climb. I mean, it's fine. I just don't think it's amazing. It's definitely not going to be the climber's bike choice.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. And as we already touched on, Kazimer mentioned it earlier, the efficiency test results also back that up. It was the slowest bike out of all of them by a fair margin. So there you go. The party's on. We're going back down the hill. Now, the Ghost uses a dual link suspension design, and Ghost has all sorts of fancy words to describe it, whatever. Tell me how this thing works on the trail, though.
I'd say overall it has a fairly neutral feel. It's not overly supportive. We mentioned being active on the climbs. That translates to descents as well. It sits a little bit deep in its travel, even with the proper spring rate, set up for my body weight. Just definitely felt like it set deeper in the back. And at times it felt like the fork had more support than the shock. So kind of a little bit of a not quite as balanced feel for me. One thing that you can do though, Formula offers different compression cartridges for the fork and the shock. So kind of a neat feature with a little bit more tinkering, could probably even that out a little bit more. But overall, it's supple, no harsh bottom outs, but it likes to use its travel more than some of the other bikes.
Alicia, I want to ask you about coil versus air. This bike obviously has that coil sprung Formula mod shock. Do you think that helped the bike or hurt the bike? Because we've also got a bunch here with air sprung shocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of just two bikes with a coil spring on the back. And I think for what the bike is trying to be, a 140 mil bike, it would do a lot better with an air shock. I think that the coil added unnecessary weight and didn't really add enough of a benefit to make it worthwhile. Or any benefit at all, honestly.
Yeah.
And what Kaz was saying about it sitting back in the travel is, I think, entirely accurate, and it just made the bike feel a little bit bogged down.
Yeah, I think overall the theme of this bike is just seems a little bit confused. If you look on paper, if you just saw an image of this bike, it's got the coil shocks, it's got the purple, it's got the full party.
It's got the purple.
It's got the purple.
That's what we look for.
Exactly. But then you kind of like dig in a little bit deeper and you start looking at the geometry chart or actually ride the bike, and those numbers don't work out as well.
Kaz, I want to stop you right there. Let's talk about handling now. Geometry chart. Ghost is using something that they call SuperFit. And they have a lot of sentences, a lot of words about how this is the size that Kazimer and Alicia should be on. But when you started going down the hill, how did that front end feel?
The front end just felt really odd because it was steep and kind of pulled you forward over the bike, which combined with the long rear end was a little bit sketchy to ride. Now, Kaz and I actually did the interactive bike fit thing online this morning again, and the SuperFit system put us both on a medium. I am close to the top of medium, Kaz is right at the top of the medium, but it didn't entirely work for either of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the size large, I think the head tube length grows by 30 millimeters. It's a
30 millimeters?
It's 140 mil head tube on the large. Yeah, so it's, I don't know. Like, it was very confusing. And so, also the seat tube length grows. This bike has around a 440 millimeter seat tube, which these days is pretty typical for a large, but we're talking about a medium, so either way, 440.
It's long for a medium.
Yeah, long for a medium. But then if you look at the large, it's a 465 millimeter seat tube.
Oh, so
like we're on the right-ish size, but not really. So there's a lot going on.
The Germans are tall.
Yeah, it's very confusing. I just wanted this bike to do better. Like in my mind, I like the idea of like a 140 mil aggressive trail bike with coil. It's just like a fun thing. But this one just, all the ingredients didn't add up.
Now, to back all this up, of course, we do timed testing as always. Kazimer?
I had my slowest time on the Ghost.
I also had my slowest time on the Ghost.
There you go.
It's just a hard bike to get comfortable with. I think we'll talk a little bit about the components too, but it has a flat bar. And so when you're kind of the lower front end, because the 140 mil fork, the flat bar, the steep C-tube angle, and then the long back end and the short reach, that puts you in a position that it's kind of like the triangle. It's like a Illuminati triangle. That's this bike.
It sounds like you guys are more like a octagon or something going down the hill.
But it's kind of like, it's like you're trying to touch your toes. So you're kind of like that. So it's a little bit tricky to ride.
Before we get to the ideal Ghost owner, we're going to talk component highs and lows because there are definitely some interesting things on this bike. Alicia?
I thought the Formula brakes were awesome, except that they were a little loud in the wet, but otherwise I think they performed really well. And it is nice to see something not from SRAM or Shimano that's working pretty great.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Like, it's just cool to see a bike that has like different stuff, Formula suspension, and It has some really interesting tuning options as well. Kaz, does it come with those compression circuits to change, or do you have to get those yourself?
It did come with a box of compression circuits for the fork. I'd have to double check, but I think it at least comes with a couple of them. And those options are available aftermarket. I think they have an even wider range of different tunes. So I do like the fact that you can tune the suspension in that way. It's something that most other suspension manufacturers don't offer.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the one thing that stands out component-wise on this bike, it's got to be that seat post.
Yeah, it's the 8 pins integrated seat post. It's been, around 5 years since we first saw it? And it's still kind of only seen mainly in German brands, but it is integrated into the seat tube. It attaches further down. But then the strange thing about this, so the idea with the integrated seat post is you should be able to slam the seat all the way down, and it's kind of adjustable to your height. But this one only has 165 millimeters of drop, which works for this bike, but I kind of want it slammed all the way down since that seemed to be the original selling point of that design. Yeah,
if it's integrated, I thought the idea was there to get the most drop you can get out of it.
Yeah, I think there's just different options. So for this one, they picked the 165 version.
Yeah. Now, another thing I noticed is that dropper post remote on that bike. It looks like it's from 2003, Alicia.
It really does. I think most dropper post levers now are pretty good. Like, they work ergonomically. They move in the direction that your thumb typically moves. You can adjust them. You can set them up with your brake. You can set them up wherever. This one was just a little behind the curve, and it didn't work for me.
So Ghost offers 2 models of this bike. We have the Trail Full Party, which sounds like a lot of fun. And there's also the Essential model, which sounds like less fun. Alicia, which one would you reach for?
I would go for the Essential model just because it comes with an air shock and it comes with slightly lower grade parts, but still really great value. And I think that is this bike's strongest point, is offering pretty good value for what you get.
Okay, on to pros and cons. Now, we had a lot of negative things to say about the Ghost, but let's start with the positives first.
For the parts kit and the price, it's actually a decent value considering what comes on it. Unfortunately, it's not available to US customers, but in Europe, I do think that the price is fairly reasonable for what you're getting. So it's a good build kit.
Alicia, do you want to touch on a couple of the negatives again?
Yeah, I think the biggest negative is it just doesn't fully know what it is. Like, it's a 140 bike. You could build it up as a mini DH bike if it had a slack head angle, which it doesn't. And then, it has burly parts, it has a coil shock, but again, it's not quite built to be confidence inspiring, which is just a tiny bit disappointing.
So who would be the ideal Ghost owner? I'm picturing somebody, I'm sort of joking here, but I am picturing somebody in Europe who's riding steep, awkward trails with tight switchbacks. And, that's kind of the stereotype, but isn't that where this bike would work well?
Yeah, I think so. I think kind of low speed, really you want a short bike. Someone who maybe isn't super into the finesse and doesn't read the fine print, but does want a bike that'll last forever and comes with really good parts.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I think that the slower speed stuff is where it works well. Rough terrain, kind of just picking your way through. It's a very small niche, but I think there are people out there that could appreciate this bike.
All right, that's it for the Ghost Riot Trail Full Party. Let us know what you think of the bike in the comments below. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss any videos from the fall field test. And we'll see you in the next one.